Have you ever met a well-known, kind-hearted, amazing personality inside and out who genuinely cares about her patient well-beings and will not lead them into the wrong direction? Not only she is an African American woman, but she is a hard-working African American woman. She is a mother, a wife, a mentor, a professor, and a doctor. She was born in Jamaica and later came to the US to pursue her life. Some may view her as young and some may view her as old. But growing up in the 1980s and the 1990s is different from growing up in the 1960s and the 2000s. And is especially different because she grew up in Jamaica and the United States.
It was an interesting time. I think that I was living in Jamaica at the time, and I was with my family, and my dad at the time actually was working in New York like half the year, and then he would come home for half the year. So that was a little bit interesting. We also, when I was in high school, a pretty memorable thing for me was we had a hurricane, and so Hurricane Gilbert actually hit Jamaica right when I started high school, which was in 1988, I believe. And that was weird. We were out of electricity for about a month, and our diet was very different because we didn't have a refrigerator. And so I remember eating canned food and rice and green beans or green peas like every day. I can't eat that now because I ate too much of it back then. So it was interesting. And when we started getting power back, then we had to do homework by candlelight for a little bit, and then we eventually were able to get back to school. But that was pretty devastating. It was very scary. I actually remember that happening, and so that was interesting. And so now when we do have weather events here, it gets a little interesting for me because I kind of have flashbacks to when I had that happen when I was in Jamaica. But I was pretty active in school. I did a lot of activities, always knew that I wanted to be a doctor, and so really I worked very hard in school because I thought that would be a way for me to, show myself worthy of applying to medical school.
We all know the lifestyle of Americans and Jamaicans are different and will probably never be the same.
So the educational system is very different. We actually start a lot earlier. So I started high school. Actually, I finished high school when I was 16. So everything kind of gets, it's done based on the British system. So everything is kind of happens a little bit earlier. Also, it's very intense. My parents were very strict about school, and I felt like my life depended on my success in school. And if I didn't do well, I would have to do a lot of explaining. And so it wasn't really a problem for me. I think I actually didn't really like homework for the first part of my life. I remember crying literally every day when I went home. And I remember the day that I was in ninth grade, and my dad came home, and he said, "Keisha, you're doing your homework on your own?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was ninth grade, and it kind of when the light bulb went off and I didn't cry anymore. But really up until that point, I cried every day because I hated homework.
Some kids don't like school, and some do. The way the British school system was set up versus the US school system is something to learn and hear about, and how it could be a good thing or a bad thing when transferring to a different country.
You can skip grades. It's a little bit different than here where you like once you're in and you're set. But I skipped grades a couple times. And so, but you can only go so far because you have to take an entrance exam to get to high school. So I actually spent 2 years in my last grade of elementary school because I couldn't move up because I was too young, but I had already done all the work at that time. And so it is kind of interesting. You can kind of manipulate the grades and you can skip grades a little bit, so there's some flexibility there. But then you do get to a stopping point because you have to be a certain age to take that exam to move on to high school. So very different. I think the educational expectations are different. And so when I got here and I started college, for example, people were saying how difficult college was, but the work that we had done was very similar to what the first year of college looked like already. And so I actually felt like I had a little bit of an advantage. Even though I was younger than most of my classmates, the work that we had done had already been where I started here, so that is a little bit different.
The school systems were different, and also many more things are different as well. We didn't hear or learn from our teachers about how Jamaican women were treated. Was it good or was it bad?
For me growing up, I didn't really have a good sense of there being a difference based on your race in my culture. And so the whole idea of what it means to be considered African American, although I consider myself Jamaican American now, but I mean that whole idea of how you're being categorized was not something I really ever thought about when I lived in Jamaica. It was very interesting. I was just me. and we were just there, and you were trying to go to, you know, pursue whatever you wanted to do in your life. And so I really didn't have that backdrop.
Jamaican women were also known as hardworking women. It wasn't too hard for them to get a job, but they might have been jobs U.S. African American women were doing, as like working in the house.
Women were always working. I mean, I didn't really ever think of it as an issue just when I was growing up at home. Although we had a lot of women who were homemakers, meaning the husbands may have been working and they were at home. But my mom ran her own business. My dad had his own business, and so I never thought about it as, you know, whether or not women had an opportunity. A lot of the women that were in my family, either friends or close family members, or I should say family and close friends, they, you know, helped to run a family business. My sister worked in a bank. She had what I thought was a regular job. So I really didn't get a sense of, you know, women not having the opportunity to pursue things. When I went to high school, all the girls that I was friends with, you know, everybody wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, or we didn't feel like we couldn't do that. And so that was not an issue. In terms of running the household, because the society is a little bit different, moms who worked would usually have someone come in and help out at home. And so I grew up with someone, her name was Miss Winnie, and she would cook dinner, and then she would help with laundry. On the weekends we were taught how to do laundry and clean the house and things like that. I learned how to cook when I was very young, and so there's always this dual role. Like, women worked and then they just had someone to help out at home, so that way they didn't have to do all of those responsibilities, but they could still work. But I never felt like women couldn't go out and do things, either because they were female or because they were, you know, African American.
With Dr. Collins being a mom, a wife, a professor, a mentor, and a doctor, how isn't she not stressed? How does she keep going? How does she manage her life with all her great responsibilities?
For me, right now, the most stressful thing is just balancing. Being a mom, being a wife, and then having a profession, I think, are the hardest things for me. And I think that's because the way that the work world is designed, it is very challenging to do all of those things. And so my biggest challenge is just balance. And I felt that even earlier because I got married 3 days before med school, so that was a little bit different. So I was married early. I was a late student. I was 25 when I started medical school, late, relatively speaking. And so I had already been out of college and had worked for a little bit and did a master's degree and then went to med school. So then shortly after being married, about 2 years into med school, I decided to start a family. And so I was doing a lot that I think a lot of people are not doing all those things in medical school or in training. So it was very different. And then once I got done and started working, I now, by this time, had 2 kids and then was working and trying to do lots of things. And then, of course, choosing a profession, being an OBGYN is demanding in itself. And so the hardest thing for me has really been just trying to balance.
There will always be somebody who can't accept the fact of an African American woman being a doctor, but they can accept the fact of an African American woman being a nurse.
It's not uncommon for people to, for example, if I go into a store and I wear scrubs, people say, "Oh, you're a nurse." And I always think it's funny how they could never say, "Oh, what do you do in the medical field?" versus, "Are you a nurse?" As if I could never be a doctor or something else, a respiratory therapist or whatever. But there's just this, I think people try to box you into what they think you are. And so for me, being a female in medicine has been very interesting because I think you get underestimated a lot. And I think a lot of people get offended by that. I've done a couple talks at different schools about what it means to be a female in medicine. And I've actually tried to look at the more positive side of that. And I've walked into a room before for a surgery and someone said, "When is the doctor coming?" And I was like, "I'm it, let's go."
But there is one thing Dr. Collins said you have to do.
You gotta pick your battles. You definitely want to stand up for yourself. You don't want to be trampled on. You need to correct people if they're making incorrect assumptions. But more importantly, your work speaks for itself. And so instead of getting caught up in verbally, proving that you are worthy of something, I prefer to spend my time on the product, the quality of my work, being consistent in that, and then letting my work speak for itself.
People may not always succeed something the first try, but can do it the second time. Things get tough, and you may want to quit, but don't do it, because all you need is a little motivation for the second go round.
Now when I mentor students, my real philosophy is you have to see people where they're going, not where they are. Because when I was at my low points, for example, when I applied to medical school, didn't get in the first time, and I thought, oh, I'm never going to be a doctor. And then meeting someone who said, hey, you really should try a second time, even if it didn't work the first time, it was a game changer for me. And so I have been very intentional about how I mentor students now, because you see people's their dedication and their motivation, and you got to push them to where they are going. And especially when they get stuck and they think it's over, you're just stuck in the mud, and the mud washes away, you can still move.
African American women may have people who doubt them, who don't believe in them, but that is what makes them stronger and powerful. Woman empowerment is real in the African American world.
Feeling really good right now. We have a vice president who is female, and she's Asian, Jamaican American, to be clear, because people don't talk about the Jamaican part all the time, but I do. I identify with that very much. There are a lot of women who are doing, just breaking glass ceilings like all over, both in terms of politics, in terms of medicine, in terms of business, in terms of research. Just so much that's going on in that arena. When we talk about STEM and engineering, I have a lot of friends who are female who are doing really amazing things, and so I think it's very important. I think that for a long time things have been defined by the way society has brought things forward, and so I think a lot of that change actually started happening when Hillary Clinton ran for president. And she didn't win, and there are lots of other things that were kind of affecting that whole scenario. But I think for a woman to step forward and say, hey, I'm going to do this, and then to follow with people like Michelle Obama, who's just such a strong force for, being intelligent and really being committed and being outspoken and sharing that voice. And so I think it's a real thing. And when I talk to my girl, and I have guys that I mentor too, so I mean, I am open to mentoring whoever, but my girls especially, I think because a lot of females have not seen someone in their family who have done the thing that they want to do, and that's not just medicine, it could be anything, but helping people to think outside of that or above that is really important. And a lot of times it's like lighting a match. Once you get people to think about things differently, they can go on their own. It's just a matter of them opening their mind to think about things that they would normally not be able to do. And so in my mind, it's a real thing. I receive it from my mentors and I give it to my mentees.
If you don't know her, well, let me say, you are about to find out who she is.
I am Edna Watts.
We can't say we knew how it was in the 1960s growing up as an African American woman. All we learn and hear about is what our teachers tell us and some few stories. But what was it really like in Edna's life?
Well, in the 1960s, everything was sort of different. You had to work hard to try to get yourself established with good education. You had to work hard in the factory, and sometimes you had to do just more than the other race to try to get yourself fit in, to make sure that you be on top.
Being on top for an African American woman would mean everything to them. They work so hard to provide for their families. As we all know, there weren't many good paying jobs for African American women.
As far as the jobs itself, it was kind of limited. Mainly, a lot of people was working in the factory, and a lot of women back there then, a lot was housewife, and they would mainly, taking care of the kids and making sure in the home and keeping everything going smooth inside of the home. You had more two parents in the household. Now wherein it's limit, you have a one parent home.
As African American women, worrying about jobs and the what ifs of doing something right and something wrong makes them think on how society will affect them as an individual.
Stated, that you have to kind of push yourself, and if you want to be successful, you know what it takes for you to get there, and so that's an impact on the African American women, and we have to just really push ourselves to get that top position. Even to our vice president, she ran for that position, and she had to prove herself, to the people. It's more like you get on these jobs, and like, for instance, myself being an educator, I had to go into the workforce on the job. I had to prove myself, and I had to work overtime and stay there making sure that everything was done. So it's put a great I'm looking for the word responsibility upon that person, because you really have to push yourself to get where you want to be and what you want to do.
With it being hard on a woman comes stress, comes a bigger responsibility. Just think about how it was being an African American woman teacher during the 70s to the 2000s.
But it's being a teacher, it's you there, and a lot of times since the integration, I'm speaking on that behalf, because you have in your classroom, you have they'll put a lot of the black children into your class, and then they'll put a lot of the behavior in your class, and so you're not balanced out with this, and so this is real hard.
Working as an African American woman was stressful back then, as it can be now in today's life. But think about all these great women who has gained power and some type of authority. But back then, it wasn't so easy for that to happen. Wherein now, there are so many opportunities.
Women empowerment is real, because it we have came a long way as far as women, because until they passed that act that gave women the opportunity to do just as men. Well, back there in the day, like I stated early, that women's more was in the house. They did house. They were housewives. But now, see, things have changed. Women's now, they want to have all the opportunity. They want to run for president. They want to do on the job force. They want the same equal opportunity. And I think it's getting there, but it's slowly, and I think they still have a long way yet to go with this. But I see a big difference, in the back there in the past as it is now.
There being so many opportunities comes with great success. But one important thing that helped Edna Watts was
I had to pray to reach my level of success.
After hearing what Ms. Watts said, how living in the 60s were, do you really think there is a big change in how she's living now in 2021?
It's different today. Things have changed. People have changed, and a lot of the jobs have changed. You have more opportunity now. The children, it's not a such thing that you can't get a good education, because you can. They have all, if you want to succeed, you just have to put forth effort to try to succeed in the thing you need to do.
Throughout the years, we hoped and wished for a change and a better life than what it was in the 1960s. And with that being said, some of those wishes have come true.